Johnny CIA. Johnny CIA did every U.S. led coup mapped, which I don't know if he's going to do an anti-CIA video here or a pro one.
There's a weapon that powerful countries use to get rid of...
I do have to pee real quick. I'll be back in a second.
...of leaders they don't like, leaders from other countries. It's called a coup. It's a French word that means a punch or a blow, because it kind of means coming in and forcibly punching out a government from power. No elections, no process, just power being seized. Just someone being pushed out and someone being put in. Coups happen in so many different ways, but I want to show you how the coup has been used by the United States of America as a tool to get what they want on the world stage. So let me walk you through some of the major US-led coups over the years to show you that while it sometimes seems like we live in a world full of order and rules, the reality is that the most powerful countries will often get their way by whatever means necessary. Okay, so here's how I'm defining the US-led coups that I'm going to put on our list here. Number one, they were successful. There's a lot of failed coup attempts. We're leaving those out. Number two, there must be at least one US government official involved in the coup. And number three, we need concrete evidence that the US was actually involved, not just speculation. While the US has been involved in tons of regime change efforts around the world, we landed on a much shorter list. These are the coups that I think best exemplify how this...
No way. Oh no. Is he saying? Wait, is he saying that like the list is actually much shorter than the real list?
Tool has been used for international power over the years. Let's start here.
First of all, you can't. Oh, he admitted the failed coups. Okay. Wait, maybe this is not that bad. This is not that bad. No. This could be not that bad. I mean, a failed coup is still a coup d'etat. I don't think he's saying that, like... I don't think he's saying that those aren't, like, actual coups. You might spend 5 hours here so bad, carefully crafted CIA propaganda designed to justify future regime change efforts, particularly
in the independent country of Hawaii. It's 1893, and the U.S. is feeling like the Hawaiian queen is a threat to American control over sugar. It's sugar that's being grown by the descendants of white American missionaries who had settled in Hawaii over the years. So the U.S. sends a military ship with hundreds of troops to show up to Honolulu, and they overthrow the queen, installing one of those descendants of the Christian missionaries, Sanford B. Dole.
Wait, he's only counted the ones that have evidence, it seems? No, that doesn't mean that these are the ones that have evidence. He's only counted the ones that the CIA has declassified, is what that means. Because all of those other coup attempts and failed coups and everything else has plenty of fucking evidence. It's just like... acknowledgement is what is lacking. Some of them do have tacit endorsements or acknowledgements, especially in the case of like Venezuela, for example. Like a big marker for an American coup is when the Chamber of Commerce's leader is appointed to the presidency of Venezuela immediately after a coup happens, and then the American government takes 25 minutes to recognize the Chamber of Commerce president as the new president of fucking Venezuela. That's a coup d'etat. It might not directly say that that's a coup d'etat, but that's a fucking coup d'etat. It's a failed one because the people immediately took to the fucking streets, but that's enough evidence in that regard. Like, holy shit, what more evidence do you need?
As the new president. Notice his last name? Yeah, this coup was one of the US's first, and it set the stage not only for the new Hawaiian president's family to grow their powerful international corporation, which was based in Hawaii, but also for Hawaii to be annexed, to become a part of the United States. I made a whole video on this coup because it's pretty wild and there's so much going on here, and it was really a turning point in showing how the US could remove leaders from power in faraway places, something that they start to do a lot more of. We're going to move on to the next coup, but I need to thank today's sponsor who makes these videos possible.
The CIA.
Period. Oh, and back into the map. I got to get out of here because things are about to heat up. We got a lot more to cover on
Chile's
these coups.
Not in
the
this?
next coup has to do with Spain. Well, actually more like Spain's colonies. Spain's glory days have come and gone. They are a declining empire, and there is major resistance in their colonies, especially in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Meanwhile, the US is a rising empire. And they already are pretty uncomfortable with Spain having colonies like 100 miles off their coast. But at the same time,
Why is my PFP Hitler? What? Talking about? I don't even know where my profile picture would be. You said my profile picture is Hitler? You said this image is Hitler. First of all, if there's one thing that is like super prominent about my profile picture, it's the mustache, right? And it's literally like Hitler's most noticeable quality is his mustache. And this is definitely not a Hitler mustache. Also, red is the color of communism. Black would be more fascist. Well, black can be communist too, but
they don't love the idea of true independence for places like Cuba or Puerto Rico. These are strategic islands right in the US's neighborhood. And like Hawaii, American companies have money invested, particularly in Cuba. Independence might mean them getting kicked out. So the US delves into this fight between Spain and their colonies. They use the explosion of an American Navy ship as their excuse, even though it was likely an accident, not an attack. But sometimes stories matter more than truth. So the US sends in troops to liberate the rebels fighting against their Spanish colonizers, promising them independence. Not only in Cuba and Puerto Rico, but later over here in the Philippines and Guam. These local uprisings eventually drive out the Spanish. And in all of these cases, the US reneges on their promise to give independence to these locals. And
liberated, but like not really at all, actually. Not even remotely close.
Figure out ways to govern Cuba and Puerto Rico indirectly themselves. The US has just piggybacked off several independence movements to enact several coups at once, allowing them to install pro-American leaders and a Navy base in Cuba, and eventually annexing Puerto Rico and Guam, which they still control, and the Philippines, which they held for 48 years. Again, I made a whole video about this one too if you want to go deeper. Anyway, we gotta move a little quicker here because we're not gonna get through all these coups. Let's move on. Okay, so we're over here in Nicaragua.
Liberated is a really funny way to describe the situation unfold when you're talking about like almost identical styles of governance and continued enslavement and colonial extraction of resources. So like what? I guess he said it sarcastically, right? He's saying like liberated, and you can hear it saying like in air quotes.
It's 1909. There's a bunch of powerful American companies here, but a new president comes to power vowing to regulate them. The US is not going to let this happen. So the Secretary of State starts spreading rumors to smear this guy, this president, saying that he's building a canal that would compete with the Panama Canal. But really, they're just upset because Nicaragua's taking loans from Europe. The US keeps painting this guy as a war criminal and someone worthy of being thrown out.
Bro, that's so crazy. I mean, good thing we don't ever do that now. And like, they don't even need to be good guys overall. Not many state leaders are. But like, good thing we never do that now when we're like trying to implement regime change. You know what I mean? Like, we would never do that now. Guys, stop. Stop saying Pepela. We never do that now. We are so different.
So push comes to shove, and the US sends ships to both of Nicaragua's coasts. They assemble a bunch of Marines in Panama. Basically just flex.
No, you don't understand. Every single country, okay? Every single country that we happen to, be enemies with, all are run by corrupt dictators, okay? And a very different style of governance than our government, which is like certainly not corrupt nor dictatorial. Okay? I hope you get that. Please. It just happens to be that way. It's just a coincidence that like all of the countries that we are actively trying to do regime change in, they're all the bad guys against us, the good guys.
Scene on Nicaragua and telling the president to step down. And the benefit of being a rising...
He labels anyone who's a social democrat as a communist Stalinist. Yeah, I mean, he is...
Is that it?
This is like very... I would say, like, I want to be nice about this, but it does seem kind of malicious to The rules based on international order make more sense when you realize U.S. interests are exempt when wanted. No, the rules-based international order is created so that it can be utilized against the United States enemies. It's not that the U.S. is exempt. It's that they were written specifically so that they could be weaponized. But yeah, I want to be nice to Johnny, who makes like very piffy videos, very clever editing. They're catchy, they're entertaining, and all that. But like, this is more insidious propaganda because it like on its face makes it seem like it's leftist critique against the CIA, when in fact it's just literally like only talking about shit that the CIA recognizes and spinning it in a way that like the CIA also talks about. Like, for example, us giving Stinger missiles to the mujahideen at the time was very openly done, right? But it was not considered to be like, how do I describe it? It was, I mean, we gave weapons. We funneled weapons into Afghanistan, okay? And we celebrated that concept because they were anti-Soviet rebels, right? They were anti-Soviet rebels who just wanted to like free their country, as Ronald Reagan said, like the founding fathers, right? But of course, when they became like, when some of those mujahideens then turned into, the Taliban and numerous other groups, like all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, we did give them weapons, but like we had to. You know what I mean? Like there is always this whitewashing, this acknowledgement of the things that have been declassified or even celebrated, like the mujahideen were at the time. Brave Mujahideen was never in Rambo. That's not what we're talking about, brother. I don't know why you keep fucking running with that line, okay? That's not, it doesn't matter. Ronald Reagan did host them. That's not the point. Like, you're kind of spoiling the vid for the chat. My point is, this video is cut like it's regime change, but it's done in a way where it basically kind of legitimizes the regime changes that happen. Do you see what I'm saying?
Worked.
Justifies
he has no
it.
choice but to step down. And soon, a leader that the U.S. likes comes to power. The coup is complete, and really, this is the first of many instances of the U.S. meddling in Nicaragua. A few years later, the U.S. is back in the region for another coup in next-door Honduras. This one was plotted by a band of private American citizens, and it follows a similar pattern. A new president comes to town, in this case directly inspired by Nicaragua's president, and he wants to take back control of the country from American businesses. In this case, we're talking about bananas. The banana companies were not going to let this happen. And it was mostly this guy, a banana businessman named Sam the Banana Man. He's not going to let this pesky president run his country. No. So he assembles his own militia. He literally buys a surplus Navy ship, loads it up with weapons, and starts his campaign to get this president out.
Shit was way cheaper back then, dude. You could just self-fund coup d'etats. Now the CIA is even incapable of like outsourcing it adequately in Venezuela, like what happened.
Sails from New Orleans to the coast of Honduras, and he literally invades the country with like a private army. Wait, where's the US government in all this? They also didn't like the political direction of Honduras either, so they just sort of stood back. Let this private invasion happen, and then at the critical moment, the US steps in to order a ceasefire, basically bullying the president to step down. He had no way forward, no defense, so he resigns.
Yeah, they just stayed out of the way, huh? How did they get trained infantrymen like that, I wonder? I mean, you can just always find them around, weapons and also, Navy ships. It's certainly like, it's just, what were the casualty numbers looking like too? Wait, where's the mention of the 1,000 people slaughtered? I mean, dude. Oh. Places to stage and train just lying around, surplus Navy equipment lying around, weapons lying around. Dude, the U.S. government certainly was not involved in this until the last second when they just like kind of bullied. They kind of bullied the government.
And the Banana Man's leader of choice takes the presidency, giving the banana businessman land and a unique status to import anything he needs tax-free. And, wait for it, he refunds him for all of the coup expenses using public Honduran money. This banana man literally overthrew the government and made Honduras pay for it. Wow. Okay, so let's move forward to the 50s, where the coup
I love you, but you're being so incredibly uncharitable. This is a live video, but for normie, this video
becomes a
justifies
more
American
useful
actions.
tool in the American toolkit.
I mean, what he just said is directly a coup d'etat that is admitted to, that he says the American government had like very little involvement in until like forcing a ceasefire. That's fucking bullshit.
There's this new US agency dedicated to collecting and analyzing information from all over the world, meaning for spying. They call it the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and it completely revolutionizes the art of the coup. Oh, and at this point, the US is now a full-blown global superpower, no longer just looking in their own neighborhood, but rather at the whole world map, investing huge resources into fighting their global rival and its communist ideology. So this
Simultaneously greatly exaggerating the influence, scope, activities, and involvements of the USSR in an effort to boost their, boost their need, because like if there's no demand for it, you just got to make it up. You got to be like, dude, it's going crazy out there. They're doing mind control. They're spying on everybody while simultaneously constantly talking about how starving and how starved the population is. And also actively recognizing that they were not starved at all and actually had like, a higher calorie diet than the American citizen at the time. But it's like literally everything and anything you've heard about the USSR has been filtered through CIA propaganda and Red Scare propaganda.
This gets us to Iran, 1953, where Iran had just elected a new star politician, Mohammad Mossadegh. He rises to power believing that Iran must take back control of its most valuable natural resource, oil, which at the time was completely controlled by a British company called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. We know it today as BP. Mossadegh is done with this. Let's kick the British out and take back our oil. But like the US, Britain is not happy with Iranians trying to take back their resources. So they warn that if they do this, there will be consequences.
Okay, it's facts.
So the British catch a quick meeting with the CIA's Middle East guy who was passing through London, and they pitch him on this idea: let's throw out Mossadegh. The CIA's like, okay, and they kind of sniff communist vibes on Mossadegh with this big desire to nationalize Iran's oil, or at least they tell themselves they do. So the CIA agrees, and they secretly send this guy to Iran. He's the Middle East bureau chief, Kermit Roosevelt. He's like in his 30s. Oh, and yes, he is the grandson of another big...
By the way, Mohammad Mossadegh is like a communist only because he wanted to nationalize the oil industry. Okay? But of course you can't do that but then you're hurting British petroleum profit margins. Like those are British petroleum refineries that you're using. We built those because we thought that we could just like keep stealing your oil and not giving you anything in return. It's not like, I wouldn't say he's like communist in any meaningful capacity, okay?
Coup guy, Teddy Roosevelt, who I have gone into in other videos. Roosevelt sneaks into Iran and is given $1 million taxpayer dollars to use, quote, in any way that would bring about the fall of Mossadegh. So now there's American CIA agents in Iran secretly trying to overthrow the government. And it's a rocky start at first with a bunch of failures. But they start using their money to get traction, bribing politicians, religious clerics, and other leaders to say divisive and controversial things about Mossadegh. They hire locals to stage attacks against religious leaders, making it look like they had been ordered to do so by Mossadegh. But really, they were just getting paid by the CIA to do this. And with enough time and money, they create an atmosphere of chaos and hostility and distrust among the public. Oh, and there's weapons. The CIA stashes enough weapons and explosives to support a, quote, 10,000-man guerrilla organization for 6 months. Like, just in case they need to, like, start a full...
Yeah, bro, that kind of stuff certainly doesn't happen anymore. Like, no color revolutions or anything like that. This is part of the reason why a lot of people... I'll just say it like this. There's a reason why I famously always say, like, if you have anti-American sentiment when talking about like 98% of history and also whatever is going on in the world, you're gonna be right 98% of the time. You know what I mean? But the 2% of time, you're not accounting like genuine animosity on the ground. But like, you're going to be right 98% of the time. Okay? Now, of course, those 2%, they'll never let you live it down. They will never let you fucking shut the fuck up about that. They will never let you go, oh yeah, my bad, I was wrong about that. But it makes total sense because they used to do this shit and they still do this shit, for the record.
Full-on conflict. The result of all of this is more violence and chaos that engulfs the capital. Shops are being destroyed, bullets are flying into mosques, people are beaten, and thousands of paid demonstrators flood the street. The city falls into anarchy, all of it orchestrated by CIA money. And in the end, this all results in a bloody shootout at Mossadegh's house. He eventually gives up and turns himself in. He's put through a sham trial and found guilty of treason and sentenced to 3 years in solitary confinement and then house arrest, where he stayed until his death. The previous ruler of Iran, Mohammad Reza Shah, which just means king, had fled the country. But now, with the democratically elected Mossadegh gone, and with the backing of the US and UK, he could charter a flight back into Iran and take control.
The Shah crowns himself in a tradition which goes back 25 centuries. His title is King of Kings, and he becomes Emperor of his nation.
While this is happening, the United States is doing this everywhere around the world, some unsuccessfully and some successfully, most of which is not being mentioned in this video. So if you're asking me, like, where is it happening right now? Like, can you give me an example? Literally everywhere, okay? That does not change the reality that there might be on-the-ground legitimate resentment. That does not change the reality that some of the people might foolishly believe that, like, America has their best interests in heart. Kurdish people being one of the primary examples of this, even though Kurdish people at this stage perfectly recognize that they are just being utilized as a militia force, and they are more valuable to U.S. State Department interests as, like, a roving a band of different militias that fight America's battles in the Middle East. But everywhere, literally everywhere that you see some level of like everywhere where there is any kind of political movement, whether it be African nations, whether it be in Asia, whether it be in the Middle East, America has at least some of its tentacles involved.
The US really came out on top here. They got what they wanted. They now have an American-friendly dictator in a powerful country in the Middle East, who is now welcoming American oil companies to get in on one of the largest oil reserves on Earth.
Like, that's why, for example, Juan Guaido, you might not like Maduro, okay? Maduro, you might not like him. You might not consider him to be a good leader. But Juan Guaido, the first thing he tried to do to utilize way above the rights and responsibility that the fucking Constitution had afforded him as like a potential interim period of presidency, immediately talked about privatizing oil refineries. Why? Why? Like, is that the most pressing matter? Is that what the Venezuelan people are yearning for? They're yearning for freedom by privatizing their oil refineries. That's what it was. No, it's the same shit. They do it all the time. They do it nonstop.
Earth. Under the Shah, Iran becomes a brutal police state. He executed military officers, student leaders, anyone associated with Mossadegh. He set up a secret police force, and life was brutal. So brutal that in 1979, the frustration of Iranians burst forth in mass protests that ran the Shah out of office and replaced him with an inspiring new leader who would turn Iran into an Islamic republic, built in part off a foundation of resentment for the US having meddled in their country.
I mean, this is 100%. This is what I talk about. I mean, it's like reductive, but this is what I mean. When I talk about like all of these Middle Eastern countries that you look at and you're like, what the fuck? They're living in a different time period. It's like, that wasn't the case for literally all of these countries, okay? The only reason why Turkey, well, I guess Turkey now is a little bit different, but the only reason why Turkey did not get impacted in a similar way was because it was a part of NATO and was allowed the United States to put fucking missile bases directed at the USSR. And even internally in Turkey, we had a fucking Cold War of our own. That happened. That happened internally in Turkey too. Why the fuck were the Turkish communists and Turkish ultranationalists fighting against one another? Do you care to do you understand which side do Turkish ultranationalists who was being armed in that fight? Or who inevitably won, I guess? The United States of America, of course, was funding, arming, training, and allowing the ultranationalist Grey Wolves to operate. They did this in the entirety of Europe, too. One of the most famous instances being Gladio. They did it through NATO. For our allies, we did it through NATO. For our enemies, we did it in ways like this. Okay?
The Islamic Republic has held power ever since, and has morphed into the oppressive theocracy we know today, though maybe not for long.
Like, why was there no network internally? Do you think the Iranian population had no communists, had no revolutionary forces within it? Or were they eradicated successfully? Because time and time again, America always considered fascist reactionaries to be valuable allies, especially in the fight against communist revolutionaries, which they saw to be the real threat. Because communist revolutionaries, whenever they took power, would do shit like nationalize the oil industry, would do things that would undermine the authority that the IMF and the World Bank was trying to create on the third world. The USSR was a flawed, imperfect nation, but imagine how more unsafe the third world would have been in the second half of the 20th had the USSR not existed to be a counterbalance, a force to put America in its place whenever America wanted to swing its big dick across the third world domestic politics. Yeah, I mean, literally. A lot of Americans look to the Cold War era and think like a multipolar world was devastating and terrifying. Yeah, it was. It was literally devastating and terrifying because the top of the hour ad break was here and no one was subscribed for $5 or for free with a Twitch Prime. Think about a future like that where top of the hour ad breaks come and no one is subscribed. There's no gifted subs. There's no $5 a month subscription. There's no free one in the form of a Twitch Prime. And you're just sitting there watching 3-minute ad breaks at the top of every hour. Terrifying proposition. A broadcast that is interrupted by that. MP Sharky, thank you for the 5 get the subs. MK Cakes, thank you for the 5 get the subs. Allowing 10 people to no longer see the ads at the top of the hour. Here's a 3-minute ad break now. Anyway, no, what I was going to say is, yeah, the world was terrifying and incredibly violent when these two warring nations were constantly dick swinging, but only made more terrifying because America kept arming fucking fascists who would do gruesome atrocities in the name of anti-communist action. You know, not dissimilar to Nazi Germany, if you want to think about it like domestically, you know? Capital owners sided with fascists in the lead up to World War II because they saw fascism as an adequate mechanism of control. They saw fascism. They saw, on the one hand, revolutionary action growing through trade unionists, communists alike, socialists, and they saw fascists that promised control over that through violent means, and they chose their guy. America literally took that and basically made it global. They were like, that's fire. We're going to keep doing that. That's the best. That's why I always say we are the villains of the world. Oh shit, this person basically said exactly that. Nazi Germany and the fascist movement of the 30s could be looked at as a global bourgeois experiment in how best to apply colonial tactics to Western domestic populations. British colonialism, which had captured at least half the earth, immediately collapsed after World War II, replacing it with USian neo-colonialism, a sort of hybrid colonialism with liberal democratic aesthetics. The Anglo-bourgeois had learned a lesson. The old civilizing mission of colonizers was no longer effective propaganda. The new rhetoric, new logic for colonization had to be created. This led to the advent of the World Bank, IMF imperialism via Bretton Woods. This hybridizing of colonialism has reflected a similar evolution of Western domestic policy. Western nations now regularly employ colonial and neo-colonial tactics on their own populations. Yup, but with a consistent liberal democratic veneer couched in the logic of the free market. The U.S. exemplifies this best, being foremost leader in shaping how nations organize themselves post-World War II. Fascist violence and repression is largely reserved for internal colonies and those poor enough to be associated with them, while the democratic veneer prevails as a moral signpost. The U.S. police can kill 1,000 a year. U.S. can have the largest prison population per capita. U.S. prisons can use slave labor, which is true, by the way. All of this is true. U.S. can even support fascism in other nations. But so long as the bourgeois and the petty bourgeois can vote, it's not explicitly a fascist nation. U.S. intelligence can mass surveil, can employ violent and covert tactics on civilians. The government can execute the innocent, harbor political prisoners, deliberately poison and render more vulnerable citizens destitute, yet still not be labeled authoritarian, dictatorial, or fascist. That's why I always say the only difference between like theocratic monarchies and imperialist violence that they engaged in versus the capitalist neoliberal hegemonic order that we exist under now is basically the lie of meritocracy. Back then, the justification for these kingdoms was that God allowed my lordship to stay in power. But now, a lot of people don't fuck with that God narrative. They're like, I don't know about this God shit. So what do they believe in? What do they worship? The altar of capitalism. It is the exact same dogmatic belief structure that is still very much ingrained in the medieval peasant minds of our current population. Okay? Well, it's meritocracy. These guys deserve it. They worked really hard. They worked really smart. You know, Elon Musk deserves all the wealth. Jeff Bezos deserves all the wealth. And then what do we have? The profits that these capital owners create, then design the system and create the institutions to then reinforce that cycle of violence and basically normalize it. So you don't even think about it. You're like, what? There's no alternative system. The alternative system is USSR. Everyone's dying in fucking bread lines. Holy shit. Meanwhile, we have bread lines here, motherfucker. Bread lines means the government is at least offering food. You don't even get bread lines in America. You literally stand in line to buy the bread. Anyway. This was a key lesson taken from the Nazi experiment. You can repress, but you can't revel in it. The repression must be a means, not an end. Hence, this is the problem the bourgeoisie have with Trump. He makes it impossible for the U.S. to continue to perpetuate its moral facade. The Nazis and fascists reveled in their superiority. They openly bragged about how stupid they thought democracy is. This ultimately contributed to their undoing, as the Western bourgeoisie could no longer support them and maintain its ethical posture. Their perceived superiority. I think that this kind of falls apart a little bit here. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with this part. I think fascism and the internal contradictions accelerated within fascism is part of the reason why it falls apart. And neoliberalism is an infinitely better mechanism of control because you know, it does give you this false sense of security and this false sense of freedom, this false sense of choice. But certainly, I think fascism was always destined to fail because, again, you always are eradicating points of the population. There's no end point to fascism. It's a self-defeating concept because, you know, what did Hitler want to move towards? He wanted to move towards the Übermensch, right? So if it wasn't just like the Roma people, the Jews, the trade unionists, the communists that were being eviscerated in labor camps, being murdered, and the disabled population, he was ultimately going to then move to culling the next round of the Volk, ultimately until he arrived at the eugenics project of the Übermensch. So that's like always going to be a self-sucking, self-destroying system, a self-destroying structure. What is the Faustini saying? Neoliberal and American unipolar power also led to the greatest decrease in global poverty. Yeah, shouts out to China for that, I think. And the largest redistribution of wealth from the west to the east under its unipolar world order. But all bad. Also, thank you, Russia, for bringing us back together. Again, you are taking You are, Faustini, anti-China, if I'm not mistaken, unless you're like the Michael Bloomberg type liberal, neoliberal. And you are now, again, basically fucking, you're literally taking on the accomplishments of China. And even the USSR, depending on how far back you're going. No, China isn't a threat. Okay. So you are a Michael Bloomberg style China supporter. Austerity is one example of this evolution, being the economic logic of neocolonialism applied domestically. The U.S. bases its necessity on the movements of the free market. Use of covert action against subversives, i.e. bringing Phoenix program tactics to L.A., is another colonial logic turned neocolonial that ended up becoming domestic policy as well. The Phoenix program itself seemed to be inspired by certain British acts of colonial repression. Evidence points to the Phoenix borrowing from the British Malaya emergency as well as their response to the Kenyan Mau Mau rebellion. Similar tactics would infamously be used to subvert the Black Power movement. Block Faustini for your own mental health. Goddamn. What? No, China isn't a threat. Aging population. Okay. How do you avoid mentioning Polish people in the Hitler argument? Man, I didn't do it deliberately. God damn, I forgot the Polish for 1 second. Holy shit, dude. There are other groups that I forgot as well. Okay, calm down. He hated a lot of people. Christ. Okay, let's get back to this video that I forgot that we were watching.
Before we go on, a quick reminder that all of these coups, these plans to overthrow leaders in other countries, did not require American votes or consensus or approval of Congress. It was usually just a few key men in government buildings in Washington, D.C. making this happen. These people would go on to define the Cold War and shape so many...
No, I don't agree with that either. Like, no, I don't think it's like, no. No, it's not like a couple people, dude. What the fuck? This is a collection of interests that they are managing and defending. And I would go so far as to say that the reason why they're in that position is because they're defending those interests. It's the same as like in manufacturing consent. Who rises to the top? Who rises to the top in the media? It's a self-selecting pool of individuals that inevitably cuts those who are going against the grain, who will then speak out against speak out against the unjustifiable constructs. Like, that's how it always works. It's not just like a couple guys acting out on their own desires. It's usually people that were elevated to that position because they are the at the time the best person to advocate for the desires of the bourgeois capital owning class.
Covert operations around the world that many of which we'll never know about. Okay, let's keep going. The next year in Guatemala, the CIA tried to pull the same playbook that they used in Iran, once again targeting a leader that the people had elected, but who wanted to take back the country's resources for the people, to break up these American monopolies that controlled the country's electricity and railroad. The president even starts to seize land from one massive banana company. It was often unused land that he wanted to redistribute to the locals who could farm it and feed their families.
How dare, dude, fuck this guy. I mean, I don't like that.
And hopefully climb out of the system of endemic poverty in the country. Once again, I made a whole video on this, the geopolitics of bananas in Central America. But the fact is that the US decided that they had to defend the banana companies, or else more communist reforms would spread. So the US President and Secretary of State ordered an overthrow, and the CIA got right to work. The CIA hand selects a leader that they want to be in power. And then they start giving equipment and training to a bunch of Guatemalan exiles.
By the way, again, like, fuck. I don't think I'll say this much. Okay. Remember what I used to always say? It's literally basic social democratic moves that a lot of these nations are making. And it's the way to look at it is like that Family Guy color blotter. You know what I mean? It's like, it's social democracy and it's fine if it's a white European nation. It's completely a no-no if it's a brown Latin American, South American, Central American, or African or Middle Eastern nation. Then it's like, it's communism. It can't be happening. We need to stop it. Like, literally, these were nations that were prevented from emancipation, prevented from utilizing their own natural resources every single time.
And private soldiers. They set up a secret operation base on the outskirts of Miami. They start delivering weapons to the Panama Canal. But like the other coups, it can't just all be about weapons. They gotta own the information space. So they create a radio station that sounds like it's a local Guatemalan radio station, but really it's being operated out of a small town in Florida. And they start publishing fake news about an uprising, unrest, a rebellion. And then, at the same time, the fighters that the CIA had trained and armed invades Guatemala. Pilots start dropping bombs on fuel tanks and military posts and airports. But they weren't starting a full-on war.
I also want to mention one other thing. For everybody who is like looking at this and seeing that like the tactics have never changed and it's almost identical, this is literally the reason why a lot of countries that are not inside of the Western hegemonic power structure as like aligned nations have such rigorous information control. Okay? They saw this happen over and over again. They still try to implement this in Cuba regularly. Okay? But that is also part of the reason why a lot of these countries, including Cuba, including China, do such rigorous information control and do not allow dissemination of information in their countries that is not completely fucking, checked by the government. This is happening everywhere. Obviously, when our aligned nations are doing it, they're doing it at their own behest because they're capitalists, they're allies. But that is precisely the reason why information control happens in these countries. I don't like it. I live in America. I like the freedom of information here. I like the supposed freedoms for the most part. But like I like the liberty that I have, right? But I certainly understand why other countries are more authoritarian when they are not completely inside of the bosom of America, okay? When they're outside of it, they have to engage in this because they don't want to fucking have coup d'etats. But the irony, of course, is that America will then look at that, point to it, and go, look at how authoritarian these countries are. And they are authoritarian, okay? Dude, literally can't say a good thing about America without a backhand dig law. I mean, dude, whose channel are you on, brother? When America was at war, we implemented the Espionage Act, okay? We were fucking ruthless. We literally built concentration camps for Japanese people that were living here. Do you understand? So don't talk to me about fucking Cuba or China or any of these other fucking places when, and how authoritarian they are, because they're constantly fucking, under threat, under legitimate threat. Maybe not China as much, especially because like the economic power that they have is massive. But as far as like authoritarian means of controlling information, yeah, that's going to happen.
They weren't trying to cause real damage. They wanted it to feel like a domestic uprising, like a war was on the horizon, to freak people out. And for many, it totally worked. They thought that this was a real uprising and had no idea that the CIA was behind it all. But the president knew what was up. He had messed with the USA, and now he's hearing about it. Military leaders in his circle are feeling the pressure from the big bully from the north, and they turn on him, and he eventually surrenders. On his way out, the president addresses his people, makes it very clear that, quote, the United Fruit Company, in collaboration with the United States, is responsible for what is happening to us. And just like that, one president is out and the hand-picked CIA option is in. This new regime is brutal and goes on to do horrible things, detaining people they thought were communists, killing prisoners.
They did all this shit while also the environmental degradation they caused was also vast too. Remember that. Like, it was insane. They were just like fucking, they were just like ripping forests apart. We talk about like, currently we talk about fucking what Bolsonaro did in the rainforest in Brazil, and we're like, oh, that's a big no-no. What are you doing? Meanwhile, we did that everywhere. Okay? Everywhere.
Breaking up labor unions, and in the process, restoring the banana company's land and ensuring that they may.
Yeah, also Johnny is like definitely, laying this on super gently when he says detaining people that they thought were communists. It's like, no, you're just like fucking murdering farmers, dude. That's what you were doing.
And goes on to do horrible things. Detaining people they thought were communists, killing prisoners, breaking up labor unions, and in the process, restoring the banana company's land and ensuring that they maintained their hold on this economy. This kicks off an era in Guatemala of more political assassinations and instability, something that still plagues the country today. And yet to this day, there is no evidence that the Soviets were ever slightly interested in Guatemala. Communism was once again the excuse, but really this was about securing American business interests, tearing a country apart for bananas.
Bananas taste the best and are the best for you.
All right, let's go to Africa. So it's 1960 here in the center of Africa, a country called Congo.
By the way, Arbenz was never like officially aligned with communist thought or was a communist in any capacity. He was just a social democrat. Remember, in a lot of instances, what these people always do is just basically, because like communism is a big no-no, and they're just basically saying like, oh, these guys are communists. Go in and do whatever the fuck you want. And for those of you who are wondering, like, when we do stuff like this, right? When we do stuff like this, the impact that we leave behind is what leads to massive amounts of immigrants because of the economic turmoil. Okay? Like, whenever people talk about immigration being like a huge issue or whatever in America, people refuse to recognize America's impact. The reason why people want to leave, like, I'll tell it to you like this, okay? Chatters, you grew up in your hometown. Your friends and your family live there. Why the fuck would you ever, like, leave your hometown if you didn't have to? I mean, some people have, like, big dreams. They want to go to the city, yada, yada. That's not what I'm talking about. You never want to like leave your friends and family and your culture behind to go somewhere else that doesn't even understand your language, that is going to treat you like a fucking outsider, that you can't even like legally enter half the fucking time. You do that because you're literally forced to. Why are you forced? Because the economic devastation that we brought about is the leading cause for the instability in these countries and the lack of opportunities in those countries. We go there, we build a couple railroads so we can like more efficiently fucking process their natural resources. We give none of them the fucking profits. Okay, we give the nation none of it back. We rob them fucking blind. That's why people always say Africa as a continent is not a poor continent. As a matter of fact, Africa's biggest fault was it's a very rich continent, okay, with vast riches. The problem is those vast riches were robbed. That's the issue. We pillage them, and we continue pillaging them. Yeah, I know. Yellow Parenti. Yeah. Whatever. I should throw Juniper style or an Ostenac style fucking. I should throw Ostenac style fucking Subway Surfers alongside what I'm saying, so people can focus on what I'm saying. A lot of the leaders in America cooed were social democrats for sure, but why did America allow for social democracies to thrive in Europe but not anywhere in the world? Because they already had a stranglehold through the Marshall Plan and post-World War II development through NATO. They already have full control. They were white. They had full control over these countries. You know, that was fine. They were allowed. They did, by the way, they also did that in Europe too. They did not allow social democracies to thrive in Europe. They literally killed trade unionists in Europe too. It's just they killed social democrats or stopped social democrats in European nations as well. And then once neoliberals were in power or like right-wing institutions were in power, they were like, all right, we're good now. Yeah, Swedish prime minister is a good example of this. Italy is a great example of this. Greece is another example of this. So the idea that like America didn't do this exact same shit in you know, maybe they didn't do it in the same like overt and like glaringly obvious and very violent ways, even though there was a lot of terrorism. Okay. There was a lot of terrorism. But they very effectively dismantled socialist movements in Western Europe as well. Some by way of economic development, right? Aiding the restoration of Western Europe, and some by way of, you know, straight up fucking murdering all of the anti-fascists.
They just gained independence from Belgium, and they have an election. And this guy, Patrice Lumumba, wins, becomes the prime minister. But immediately, over in Washington, the communist alarm bells instantly start sounding off. Because we're in the middle of the Cold War, and Congo is a place full of tons of natural resources, including loads of uranium, the main ingredient for nuclear bombs. This is at a time when Americans are keeping gas masks next to their bed and have hordes of canned goods in their basements. And officials in Washington...
A lot of this was also, again, like what he just explained, as far as like the fear of all-out like nuclear warfare, nuclear holocaust, that kind of thing, was pretty much legitimately... It was also agitated propaganda. It was basically, not agitated propaganda, but it was just propaganda that like, you know, they had a lot of... you know, the USSR had a lot of weapons. There's a missile gap. They have too much. They can fucking destroy us on a moment's notice. Like, things that you're seeing, things that you are seeing even now with, like, slowly but surely, subtly describing how much of a, you know, looming threat China is with its balloon gap, or, you know, the increasing, like, agitation between the United States and China. All of that is super, super old school Cold War propaganda against the USSR. They never, America rarely ever updates its model. They just kind of do the exact same thing over and over again, because it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Well, it doesn't really work that well lately, but, you know.
Washington can't risk Congo falling into the influence of the Soviet Union. So they start focusing on this prime minister. The CIA director called him, quote, an urgent and prime objective that should, quote, be a high priority of our covert action. So they pull a more political coup than the ones before. They start allying with Lumumba's political enemies and Congo's former colonizer Belgium. They bribe politicians, they fund protests and labor movements, and they circulate propaganda, similar ingredients to the previous coups. And when the moment is right, all these bribed politicians do what the CIA asked them to. They remove Lumumba from power, and the CIA is right there giving money and intelligence and advice to the new government. This political solution was actually not the first try. The CIA had tried to assassinate Lumumba in the past, but all of those attempts failed, which is why they turned to hijacking and manipulating Congolese politics, a brand new democracy, supporting the people who would eventually go on to put Lumumba in front of a Congolese and Belgian firing squad, making this effectively a political assassination, supported from an ocean away. And yet there's so much gray area in these coups. In this case, it's really tough to prove that the CIA's support was the key factor in Lumumba's assassination. It's debated to this day. An effective foreign-sponsored coup works like this, operating in the shadows, fueling divisions, appealing to
I don't understand. If you, like, recognize it, then why do you... Dude, this is the second time he's done this. Where it's like... It's not Why is this debatable? Like, you facilitate the removal you facilitate the ousting, and then the execution comes along with that. Like, what do you mean? What the fuck is that? It's like, wait, is he gonna talk about Gaddafi in this or no? Like, does he say that, like, oh well, who knows what happened to Gaddafi, or if it's hard to determine why Gaddafi, or if the U.S. was involved in the assassination of Gaddafi.
The worst demons of the people on the ground, through money, through influence. All right, let's move on to the Caribbean in the 1960s.
Like,
there's a brutal dictator here in the Dominican Republic. I mean, this guy's really bad. He's rumored to feed his opponents to sharks. But anyway, what the US cares about is that there's fear that a communist revolution could happen at any moment. So the CIA sends weapons to a group of hitmen who go assassinate this guy. It ends up being an ambush and a car chase. They're successful in taking him out, ending his 31-year rule. And eventually the US sends in forces to occupy the DR to make sure that a leftist candidate doesn't come to power. They restore order, and eventually a US-friendly candidate is elected.
It's like the meme where it's like, it's like the meme of, oh, socialism never works, which is why, like, socialism never works, when we involve ourselves with it. I always say the same thing. It's like, if socialism doesn't work, if it's like a fucking absolute failure, if it's a genuine failure, why don't you just allow it to fail? Why do you always have to, like, do everything in your fucking power to physically rip people for not even doing socialism, by the way, but just like socialization, literacy programs, nationalization of like certain key sectors, liberties allowed, that liberties that were given to Western European nations.
Elected. Okay, so now we have to head over to Vietnam in 1963. And boy, this is a way bigger one than we have time for, but we're trying to focus on the coup element of this. Vietnam was divided in two, between communist and pro-Western governments. The US needs the South to stay on their side, but Washington starts to lose confidence in this guy, the South's leader. He's losing a grip on the country, and the US fears that communism will take over the whole country of Vietnam. So the CIA rolls up its sleeves. It's time for another coup. This time they focus on a South Vietnamese...
Oh, I forgot to mention one other thing. When we were talking about Europe, you actually posed a really interesting question in the chat. You were like, why was Europe allowed to have some of these like social democracies? I think another reason was proximity. Other than like them being white nations overall, their proximity to the USSR played a key role here. I think that America wasn't as like aggressive in the immediate aftermath of World War II with respect to like immediately implementing with respect to like implementing coups in the same way that they're doing this. And the USSR being the big bad scary guy wasn't actually a big bad scary guy because of its like weapons. It was a big bad scary guy because there were plenty of fucking communists that were still in these countries. And if America started openly fucking doing the same shit that they were doing in like all these other nations, they were worried that people would look to and could very quickly get help from the USSR. These trade unionists and communists and socialists alike. I think that was part of the reason why they were allowed basically to have more social democratic liberties. And some of them were long-standing too, you know what I mean? Like welfare systems that were that were experimented on even before World War II, you know what I mean? Like they were just expanding on pre-existing structures. And I think that's part of the other thing too. Wait, is he saying the U.S., it was just the Congolese that were greedy and got tricked by the Americans? It's odd that he's not talking about this as an extension of colonialism. He really skimmed over the Belgian involvement in the Congo and didn't even mention the French in Vietnam. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I was gonna mention that with France. He said like South Vietnam is backed by Americans and North Vietnam is USSR. And it's like what happened before that is, you know, kind of important, I think. This is a nation that was like fighting against colonial superpowers. Anyway, I'm going to roll this back real quick.
We have to head over to Vietnam in 1963.
Like one thing I mentioned, sometimes people get mad, but like Ho Chi Minh was fond of the founding fathers, Uncle Ho. He saw his battle of emancipation not dissimilar to the founding fathers against England. Like he literally, he in a different world. I mean, obviously, it would not have happened, but different world. Who knows? Who knows what could have happened? He wasn't a marabou, though.
And boy, this is a way bigger one than we have time for, but we're trying to focus on the coup element of this.
Wait, what?
Vietnam was divided in two, between communist and pro-Western governments.
Wait, you think I'm lying?
The U.S. needs the South to stay on their side, but Washington starts to lose confidence in this guy, the South's leader. He's losing a grip on the country, and the U.S. fears that communism will take over the whole country of Vietnam. So the CIA rolls up its sleeves. It's time for another coup. This time they focus on a South Vietnamese general who also doesn't love the president, and he agrees to do the CIA's bidding. And when given the signal, the general directs his military to seize the airport and radio stations, and they block off highways. They march to the presidential palace. A bloody shootout goes down, and this president, President Diem, escapes. He happens to be with his brother, but it's not going well for them, so he realizes that he needs to set up a meeting to surrender. They're going to meet at a Catholic church. This was probably going to be a peaceful meeting, but when the generals arrive, they just kill him on the spot.
It's crazy.
Saying, quote, "To kill the weed, you must pull up the roots." Meaning, in order to solve the problem, Diem must die. Exile was not enough. Now, the US actually didn't plan for this to happen. They didn't want to kill this guy. It was not an official order from Washington. But they made this coup happen. JFK is said to be really distraught about this. The first American Catholic president behind the coup that killed the first Vietnamese Catholic president. And incidentally, JFK was assassinated 20 days later. And one national security journalist argues that Diem's assassination
Who knows how that happened? We still don't know, you know?
actually had a greater impact on American history than the murder of JFK, because it locked the US into a decade of conflict in Vietnam, which ballooned into a long war.
Locked the US into a decade of conflict in Vietnam? Like we were forced, our hand was forced into going into Vietnam? Bro, like, dog, Republicans don't say this in 2023, okay? Like, no, I'm taking it one step further. You, like, almost objectively, everyone says, like, okay, we fucking should not have done that. We should not have gotten involved. Republicans don't think that. That's crazy. Yeah, we were so locked that we just kept sending, official American trainers into the field of battle who just got shot, and then we had no other option, you know what I mean? Or our ships that kept getting shot at off the coastal line. It's just like, who knows how it happened, you know? We just got locked into it, I guess. That's a wild way to explain this.
Into a decade history than the murder of JFK, because it locked the US into a decade.
No, he's not quoting someone. He's saying that himself.
Decade of conflict in Vietnam, which ballooned into a long war, ending in an embarrassing defeat and a political crisis at home.
Yeah, that was the most embarrassing part of our experiences in Vietnam. Not the fact that we deployed in a ton of munitions, napalm, and numerous other horrifying things that we did. Not even in like North Vietnam, but in South Vietnam, where like the majority of the bombings took place. Like he's not even, I assume he's not even going to talk about Cambodia. Like There's so much here. He's just like skipping over, an atrocity that was so devastating that it still has a permanent impact with a bunch of Vietnamese babies that are still being born with like birth defects. I was actually, was it NPR? Who was talking about this the other day? South Korea was also involved in Vietnam. And I think the first ever payment for South Korean war crimes, like a court case, there was a decision for the first time on a South Korean military member engaging in war crimes against the civilian population. And what I found to be particularly strange about this, hold on, I'm going to give you guys the details here, okay? Because insane. Yeah, here it is. In a first ever, South Korea was ordered to compensate Vietnam War victim, right? This just happened. As a part of the ruling, Judge Park Jin-soo of the Seoul Central District Court ordered the government to pay Win $23,900 in compensation, saying what members of the 2nd Marine Brigade of South Korea did to her family clearly amounted to an illegal act. Now, what they did was, just wanton violence and murder, gravely wounding Win T. Tan, 62, sued the South Korean government in 2020, saying that she lost 5 relatives and she and her brother were gravely wounded when South Korean Marines swept through Pong Ni and Pong Nut villages in central Vietnam on February 12, 1968, killing more than 70 villagers. Do you know what is interesting about that date? So this is a very interesting date. I want you to pay attention to it. February 12th, 1968, where the South Korean government acknowledged its atrocities against villagers, is only 1 month removed from one of the most notorious massacres that the United States military engaged in. The My Lai massacre. On March 16th in 1968, a platoon of American soldiers killed as many as 500 unarmed citizens in My Lai, one of a cluster of small villages located near the northern coast of South Vietnam. The crime was kept a secret nearly 2 years and later became known as the My Lai massacre. So just remember that. And by the way, the thing about My Lai is that it is not unique. This was super, super commonplace. So the notion that like Vietnam was really long and complicated and we were forced into doing this thing, and it was just really bad because it had like a lot of political ramifications in the United States of America, is insane to me. Like, no matter what happens, to glance over this history is insane. Like, just to brush past it.
One of the few coups where the U.S. actually had to deal with the aftermath. Okay, let's blast through a few of these really quickly. I'm going to skirt over some details here. It's 1964 and Brazil is potentially veering off into communism with the rise of a new leftist leader. Lucky for the CIA, there's already a coup being plotted against him, so the US military just shows up with ships off the coast of Brazil. They airlift in a bunch of ammunition and supplies. They didn't end up having to do much, actually. Instead, they just stood by with reinforcements and watched the Brazilian coup go down. The leftist leader goes down and a new leader comes in. In 1973, there's a coup in Chile that is a very complicated story with conflicting accounts, and we went down a super deep rabbit hole, and we've decided that because the evidence is not rock solid, we're going to cut it for time.
No. No. What? Bro, what? There's no way. Dude. Okay. By his own metrics. By his own metrics of like what constitutes a coup d'etat. The fact that he just avoided talking about Chile is insane to me because there are other involvements that he mentioned that have the exact, maybe not even as much evidence as U.S. involvement in Chile. Like, he talked about Honduras and Guatemala that I would say Chile constitutes the exact, if we use the exact same fucking metrics of what is declared a coup d'etat, Chile absolutely is a U.S. CIA-backed coup d'etat. There is extensive documentation on it. Like, it's not like it's not like oh man, this is like really confusing. Who knows what happened? I mean, here, there's also this. In 2000, September 20th, 2000, the CIA acknowledged for the first time its extent of its deep involvement in Chile, where it dealt with coup plotters, false propagandists, and assassins. The agency planned to post a declassified report required by Congress on its website today that admits the CIA support for the 1970s kidnapping of Chile's top general for refusing to use the army to prevent the country's Congress from confirming the election of socialist Salvador Allende as president. The kidnapping failed, but General Rene Schneider was shot and died 2 days later, the day Allende's election was confirmed. CIA admits prior knowledge of the plot that overthrew Allende 3 years later, but denies direct involvement. The report says that the agency had no idea that Allende would refuse safe passage with his palace under bombardment and apparently kill himself. He was found dead of gunshot wounds. I think he's skipping it because Allende cannot be spun in any negative fashion. He can't make the argument that he somehow deserved it. I mean, some of these other ones he didn't like really spin in a. He didn't necessarily spin those in a fucking negative way either. Here's the covert action in Chile staff report. If you would like to look at it, it's extensive documentation. That shows our level of involvement in Chile. It's because neoliberalism came in after the coup in Chile. He can't go against proven Chicago economics. I don't think that's Would you rather he didn't make a video highlighting U.S. foreign meddling on a video briefly mentioning the scale of it? Personally, I think that highlighting it in general is a good thing. More people will read about it, etc. I mean, I think that covering it by at least saying, briefly, just saying like, you know, we did horrific things there would be nice. But also on top of that, I mean, this part is like completely unacceptable in my opinion.
And we've decided that because the evidence is not rock solid, we're going to cut it for time, but definitely some crazy shit went down. I'm not saying it didn't. Okay, we're back in Africa, and it's the 80s, and over here in Libya, the dictator, Muammar Gaddafi, was making lots of trouble in the region, funding terrorist groups and working to expand his influence all over the region.
For the record, some of these leaders, like, you know, Allende, even though he had some, you know, I guess, by 2023 liberal standards, problematic takes about certain things. One thing I have to mention to you is that none of these leaders are perfect, okay? No one is. It's virtually impossible to be perfect, especially if you're fighting against like a brutal dictator when you are trying to gain independence, fight a revolutionary war, whatever. I mean, there are some that he doesn't really mention all that much. But as far as like Gaddafi, yeah, he's a fucking freak. Okay, he did some crazy shit. But ultimately, where I would place him is just like a nation that was definitely better off with Gaddafi than without him.
Then he gets a call from his neighbor Chad asking for help against a rebellion. Gaddafi eagerly sends 4,000 troops to occupy a huge part of the country and makes friends with the new president by helping him exile his rival. And soon Gaddafi's getting greedy and threatening to merge Chad into Libya. The US is not into this. So Ronald Reagan fires up the well-oiled coup machine, launching a covert war, sending weapons and cash to rebels in Chad, and supporting that political opponent who was ousted, helping him fight back. And it works. The president of Chad has to flee, and the US-backed and supported leader comes to power. And now there's a conflict, and the CIA continues arming the war even after this guy is in office. The new US-backed leader rules brutally for 8 years, until he's eventually overthrown by a military officer, and in 2013 he was charged with crimes against humanity, torture, and war crimes. Okay, now let's go to this little island in 1983. It's communism again, and the US sends 2,000 troops to invade this small remote island and remove their communist leader. They didn't really know much about this small island, and they literally had to use tourism maps to plan their invasion. Anyway, American forces move in, overwhelm the Grenadian fighters who happen to be joined by their Cuban allies. The government collapses, and the US-friendly leader comes to power. Okay, back down to Central America. It's 1989, and we're here in Panama, where the US has control of a very important canal. And luckily, the Panamanian dictator has been very friendly to American interests. But the US starts losing confidence in this guy, wondering if he's really the best choice, ensuring the US maintain easy access to their vital canal. Oh, and it didn't help that this guy was indicted in Florida on drug trafficking and money laundering charges. We gotta get...
Wait. Is Iran-Contra not a part of this? Like, did he just not have time? Or... I mean, I guess it's not a...
Get him out. But the straw that broke the camel's back for this guy was when Panamanian troops killed an unarmed American soldier in Panama City. The US is done with this guy, so they invade Panama with 27,000 troops. Panama's military is crushed, and the dictator is eventually arrested and sentenced to 40 years in prison. And the US ensures access to its canal after all. Okay, so now it's the end of the 1980s, and the Soviets are invading Afghanistan. And are meeting resistance from a bunch of fighters from all over the world who have come to Afghanistan to fight back against the Soviet occupation, many of them with fundamentalist religious motivations. But the US doesn't care about their motivation. They just care that they're willing to fight against the Soviets and the Soviets' puppet, the Afghan president. And it totally works.
This part is not even true. Okay, out of all of the fucking people that they're talking about, the one instance where they like actually point to a person who like would at the very least like consider them to be fucking consider themselves to be communist, despite the fact that the USSR also thought that he was not the greatest, okay, not the best, is this fucking guy, okay. Secondly, the arming and funding of mujahideen rebels predates Reagan. Operation Cyclone is just like the official recognized version, but you know it goes beyond that. The arming radicalizing and funding of rebels goes back to Carter. It predates the USSR invasion of Afghanistan. So that definitely, that is definitely, I mean, I guess he's never going to mention that. Clearly, that would not.
With the help of the US, these fighters push the Soviets back and successfully run the Afghan president out of office. And as he's being run out of office, he forebodingly
Did you say invaded? They were invaded. They were asked to be there. Yeah, I know, but like, come on. I think it's because like they now talk about Operation Cyclone more openly in the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and all that shit. So they just like they just go with like Operation Cyclone, and these were brave mujahideen rebels that like wanted to fight against communism or whatever. But like the real problem for Mohammed Najibullah was that they were ruthless towards straight up, they were ruthless towards anyone and everyone that was practicing Islam. They were the original, let's say, Reddit atheists of their time. Not great for sure, not great. So once again, as is the case with every single fucking U.S. operation, every single every single overthrowing of prior administrations, there's usually at least like some groups that have legitimate and some groups that have illegitimate animosity towards the whatever formation, whatever like form of governance they have. If it's not the fucking extremely wealthy, if it's not like a Chamber of Commerce backed coup, it's usually more reactionary factions that they beef up, give arms to, and also weaponize against the government. For sure. But yes, Mohammed Najibullah, or the Afghan young communists that became, that got into leadership, were seen as aggressive by the USSR as well. They were, their involvement in Afghanistan was fraught. They did not originally, they were not like excited to extract minerals or whatever the fuck some people say. I mean, that came along with it for sure. But there were certainly a lot of reservations before going into Afghanistan. To be fair, the Soviets also overthrew the socialist government in Afghanistan in favor of more aligned with them, because the original socialist government was considering rapprochement with the U.S. and Pakistan.
Warns the Americans that if they leave Afghanistan in the hands of these fighters, that it would, quote, be turned into a center for terrorism. And his prophecy was completely fulfilled. Those US-funded fighters were people whose names we know today. Osama bin Laden, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the guy who started the group that would eventually become ISIS. Those same weapons that the US sent to counter the Soviets and to effect regime change in Afghanistan would go on to be used against American soldiers years later, when the US was back, orchestrating yet another regime change after 9/11, against the very groups they once enabled. The US would eventually leave Afghanistan, only to find the country immediately falling back into Taliban rule. We're almost to the end of our list, and we're now in modern day. It's 2003, and 150,000 American troops invade Iraq. They say that they are there to find and destroy weapons of mass destruction, but their main focus is taking out this guy, Saddam Hussein.
This part is like just as, first of all, every single part of this is just as complicated. You just have more access to information because it's like more relevant to contemporary politics than all the other ones. So remember, all of the things that you do know about Afghanistan, all the things that you do know about Iraq, all the things that you do know, remember, this is like, all of the tactics that the United States utilize in these places, they utilize in all the other places as well.
Which they do in a matter of weeks.
I'm not going to say anything, okay? You guys keep wanting me to say America deserved the top of the hour ad break. I'm not going to say it, but the top of the hour ad break is upon us regardless. And if you no longer want to see those ads, all you need to do is subscribe, which you could do for $5 or for free. Yes, this is something that I mention regularly. U.S. President Carter's national security advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski and his flex mode on a French publication, openly talking about how we were going to turn Afghanistan into Vietnam for the USSR, and by God we did, which led to the evisceration of the USSR. So I would see that as an overall success. This literally, I've quoted this so many fucking times on this broadcast. Anyway, but yeah. The former director of the CIA, Robert Gates, stated in his previous memoirs that American intelligence services began to aid the mujahideen in Afghanistan 6 months before the Soviet intervention. In this period, you were the national security advisor to President Carter. You therefore played a role in this affair. Is that correct? Yes. According to the official version of history, CIA aid to the mujahideen began during the 1980s, that is to say, after the Soviet army invaded Afghanistan. But the reality, secretly guarded until now, is completely otherwise. Indeed, it was July 3rd, 1979, that President Carter signed the first directive for secret aid to the opponents of pro-Soviet regime in Kabul. And that very day, I wrote a note to the president in which I explained to him that, in my opinion, this aid was going to induce a Soviet military intervention. Despite this risk, you were an advocate for this covert action, but perhaps you yourself desired the Soviet entry into war and looked to provoke it. It isn't quite that. We didn't push the Russians to intervene, but we knowingly increased the probability that they would. When the Soviets justified their intervention by asserting that they intended to fight against the secret involvement of the United States in Afghanistan, people didn't believe them. However, there was a basis of truth. You don't regret anything today? Regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It had the effect of drawing the Russians into the Afghan trap. And you want me to regret it? The day the Soviets officially crossed the border, I wrote to President Carter, we now have the opportunity of giving to the USSR its Vietnam War. Indeed, for almost 10 years, Moscow had to carry on a war unsupportable by the government, a conflict that brought about the demoralization and finally the breakup of the Soviet Empire. And neither do you regret having supported the Islamic fundamentalism, having given arms and advice to future terrorists. What is most important to the history of the world? The Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Empire? Some stirred up Muslims or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War? You know, this would never happen again. We would never do that. So please stop saying we did that. Please. Yeah, Mika from Morning. Is that real? Is this actually Mika from Morning Joe's dad? That's crazy. Anyway, I forgot to run the hour, top of the hour ad break, by the way, after saying I was going to run it. Some stirred up Muslims, but it's been said and repeated, Islamic fundamentalism represents a world menace today. Nonsense! It is said that the West had a global policy in regard to Islam. That is stupid. There isn't a global Islam. Look at Islam in a rational manner and without demagoguery or emotion. It is the leading religion of the world with 1.5 billion followers. But what is there in common among Saudi Arabian fundamentalism, moderate Morocco, Pakistan militarism, Egyptian pro-Western and Central Asian secularism? Nothing more than what unites the Christian countries. Kind of fucked up. He didn't mention list CIA client states. Yeah, but like he didn't mention Turkey, which is kind of messed up, I think. Anyway, you want him to mention Turkey? I'm just saying, like, we always like to be at the table. Fun fact, Edward Shevardnadze, the foreign minister of the USSR at the time, also the second president of Georgia, was responsible for forcing Najibullah to stay in Afghanistan, as well as the USSR staying in Afghanistan for so long. He might literally be responsible for how Afghanistan is today. Central Asian secularism, Turkey. Yeah. Okay. Now let's get to Saddam.
It's enabled. The US would eventually leave Afghanistan, only to find the country immediately falling back into Taliban rule. We're almost to the end of our list, and we're now in modern day.
His son Mika's brother is our ambassador to Poland. What a wonderful mark the Brzezinskis have left in our politics, dude. That's so sick. Mika, Mark. Even some chatter said he was based. Some people really hate Islam. Yeah, bro. I wonder why. Of course they fucking hate Islam. They grew up in America in a post-9. They had their adolescence in a post-9/11 America. The fact that they're like, I'm shocked that it took 20 years for Americans to like no longer openly want to fucking murder Muslim people on the streets. Like it's one thing that Matt Christman said when a Sunni Muslim was running on the Republican ticket, okay, against John Fetterman, Dr. Oz. The fact that there were no like Islamophobic questioning, no mentions of Islamophobic sentiment in that process is wild to me. Okay? They just kicked Ilhan off of committees. Yes, of course. That still exists. But you're crazy if you think that that is like the fact that Ilhan Omar is on the Foreign Affairs Committee is my proof that like she was on a committee to begin with is proof that like we have moved beyond that that style of politics. Like people don't necessarily consider Islam to be the same kind of threat it once was. That's why there's so much hidden and sometimes open animosity, even from a liberal perspective. Because remember, just like with anti-blackness, which is a core value of, a fundamental of like American societal development, okay? Americans always have a way to get every type of American to find their own reasons to despise our State Department designated enemies. Okay? Republicans hate him because they're brown. That's easy, right? But then Democrats hate him because like they're barbaric. Democrats hate him because they don't believe in liberal values. We need to be the civilizing force, right? So it's very very unique way to do it. I mean, it's just like same with anti-blackness, for example. You know what I mean? There is a very liberal way to engage in like anti-black rhetoric. There's a very liberal way that anti-black rhetoric is permeated through liberal academic circles. Like black men are aggressive and violent towards black women and gay and trans black members of their own communities. Like that is a very that's a very liberal way to basically say the same shit that like racist people say. You know what I mean? I mean, not racist, but like Republican conservatives say. It's the angry black man that's a violent savage trope being sanitized to be more appropriately disseminated through liberal circles. You know? The reason why I'm mentioning that is because like the same exact thing can happen for America's common enemies. America waged a war against Islam for a very long time. How do you market that war? Or at least people who would otherwise be like doves and, anti-war activists. How do you get those guys to also be on board? Well, you tell them Muslims are anti-gay. They're throwing gay people off buildings, They're backwards. They mistreat women, that sort of thing. That's how you do it. which is why I am, again, shocked that, like, they've kind of dropped that, that strategy has, like, that strategy is, like, not something that they apply as much anymore.
It's 2003 and 150,000 American troops invade Iraq. They say that they are there to find and destroy weapons of mass destruction, but their main focus is taking out this guy, Saddam Hussein, which they do in a matter of weeks. Saddam fleeing into hiding and President Bush declaring mission accomplished, establishing an American-friendly government in Iraq, creating once again a negative byproduct by alienating huge swaths of the Iraqi people and army who form a bunch of anti-American rebel groups that go on to fight against the American occupation, some morphing into groups like ISIS who wreak all kinds of havoc on the region to this day. Once again, I made a whole video about this topic, go check it out. Iraq remains a place of deep political instability. Trust in government is extremely low. And the question of how and why we did this expensive, horrific, destructive coup is still something that there aren't really good answers to. Again, you can go watch my video for more on it.
Yeah, what? No, there is, man. What the fuck? What? It's not even just oil, Afghanistan, opium, and you know, minerals, but like, no, every single thing that he's mentioning in many ways is not just about like destroying communism. It's also about a industry that was growing permanently, especially accelerated after Eisenhower, that basically became our most prominent and sole industry. The military-industrial complex. That's it. Like, that's... We don't need to literally fucking... We don't need to, like, you know, have a good reason or natural resources that we must extract from these countries half the fucking time anymore. Because, like, we have this machine that demands blood. First, we give the weapons, then we use our new weapons against the old weapons that we gave to the fucking area. That's it.
On that. And this gets us to the final coup on our list. It's 2011.
Bro, I'm Kurdish. When I went there as a child, I was 12, 13 years old. It was the time Saddam was just taking Americans were there like shit, taking control of all the oil places. The only ministry that did not fucking get eviscerated in the American invasion of Iraq was the Ministry of Energy. That's it. Like, that's it. That's all you fucking need to know in that one. You know what I mean?
During a wave of protests spreading throughout this region, trying to take down all these strongmen dictators, one of which was this guy, Muammar Gaddafi, the same Gaddafi we were talking about earlier who's like taking over Chad. He's still here and he's still a very horrible dude. And there's worry that he's going to potentially massacre all of these pro-democracy protesters.
Yeah.
So the US feels like it must get involved.
Bro, come on. How can you fucking seriously say this, bro? How can you seriously do an entire video on coup d'etats that we have like facilitated, okay? How can you look at that and then be like, the US always found a way to, you know, drum up support. The US always found a way to drum up support with when, you know, inside of like reactionary forces within the country, blah, 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 always. And then when it comes to Libya, the closer you get to like modern day, the more his narrative is just like, yeah, these were pro-democracy people that like he was trying to fucking execute because they just wanted to do democracy, I think. That's why they were, you know, that's what the fuck was happening. It's just like his hatred for democracy overtook. And America loves democracy. In my video where I talk about all of the instances where America has like overthrown democratically elected leaders.
Involved to save all of these pro-democracy protesters. So the US feels like it must get involved to save these protesters. They rally their NATO allies.
That statement in and of itself is like gross, dude. The U.S. felt like it had to be involved. The U.S. felt like it needed to be involved because they wanted to save protesters. What the fuck? Like, what's NATO doing there? Yeah, what's going on there?
Allies to help them. But at some point, the mission...
Wait, what do you mean? That's a... Guys, NATO is a defensive force. You guys surely are not going to make the argument that NATO was being weaponized as an offensive force again. NATO is simply a defensive force. That surely would never happen. Stop. I guess their never-ending love for democracy led them to, do a no-fly zone and send missiles. He's not doing an ironic voice. He fucking means this.
Switches to total regime change. We don't...
Hold on.
Allies to help. This feels like it must get involved to save these protesters. They rally their NATO allies to help them. But at some point...
Bro, that's crazy. He literally said these guys were forced. These guys were forced, Gaddafi forced their hand. Gaddafi forced their fucking hand into, Gaddafi forced their hand into fucking, by attacking democracy protesters. And then the mission somehow switched. They went in to save people, and the mission somehow switched.
Point, the mission switches to total regime change.
Just like we were locked into Vietnam.
We don't know exactly how this happened.
We don't know how. That's crazy.
Only the people in the room do. But is it surprising? We've seen this long arc of the U.S. using the coup as a force for getting their way in an international conflict. It's a tried and true tool in the American foreign policy toolkit. So it's not surprising that a coup becomes a solution during these difficult decision-making processes.
Libya had the highest score on the Human Development Index before we attacked. It now has open air slave markets and a collapsed economy. European and American oil companies have new access to oil contracts, though. Don't worry, bro. Erdogan's going to save Libya, okay? Leaked Hillary Clinton email revealed NATO killed Gaddafi to stop the formation of a United States of Africa. What? On what? I don't know if this is... I don't know. I don't think that... okay. Like, I feel like this is... I remember these emails. Sam Cedar says that he wrongly supported the no-fly zone at the beginning because not only the U.S., but China and Russia and UN reported it as a crisis needing intervention. Like, yeah, Gaddafi was 100% a Pan-Africanist, but there was zero political momentum for that during the time of his death in 2011 law. Yeah. The thing about Gaddafi is that, like, he is a bit of an enigma, okay? I'll just say it like that. There's not a lot of consistent principles. A lot of people try to bring it up and make it seem like he had a lot of genuine interest that work. Is that he did some good things, but I don't think that. Like, I don't think that he was all too concerned with genuinely creating a African Union, a United Nations of Africa. You know what I mean? None of which, of course, deserves the U.S. involvement and the subsequent, ass fucking that he got from a bayonet on camera, which Hillary Clinton laughed about. But also on top of that, more importantly than Gaddafi as a person who, you know, did some very interesting and sometimes very fucked up shit, the people of Libya did not deserve the aftermath of this involvement. You know what I mean? What? Zoomers don't know. I'm sure they've seen this.
Land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure.
Anyway, I don't think that this constituted a valid enough threat to America.
So anyway, the target
Western
becomes
interests.
Gaddafi, and now NATO drones are firing missiles at his convoy, and he eventually gets captured and gets killed on the spot. Libya has been in chaos ever since, but it's not like it was a great place under Gaddafi. And once again,
It objectively was a better place under Gaddafi. That is an insane thing to state. You're literally comparing at least a developed nation state. What the fuck? That is an insane fucking assessment, dude. Again, Johnny, liberal, I love the CIA Harris, straight up lapping the Republican Party's assessment on the situation. Like he is outright winging the Republicans on this matter. Like even Republicans who are like, yeah, I don't really give a fuck, at least because of Clinton's involvement, say like, look at Libya, there's open slave markets. Johnny Harris is more to the right than like fucking neocons, dude. Holy shit. I mean, that's like pretty unhinged, to be honest. Oh my God, I just realized why chat's making... Oh, dude, I forgot that Johnny Harris is a Mormon, ex-Mormon. That's why chat keeps making Mormon jokes. I was like, why the fuck are chat making Mormon jokes? Dude, okay, listen. That does not mean he's automatically CIA, dude. What the fuck? We've had 2 Catholic presidents now, okay? This is a different time in America. It's not, Mormons aren't automatically CIA now.
again, we're in a gray area where we don't know the history that didn't happen, or how things could have turned out different if the US didn't get involved. That debate lives on. Okay, so that's our list. These are our coups that we decided to go over in this video. There are so many more that we could have mentioned. My purpose in doing this broad back-to-back history of American-led coups
Why is he doing
was so that
this?
we can see patterns that emerge. How a rising superpower became really good at removing leaders that didn't align with their way of seeing the world. Or, in a lot of cases, who were not friendly to American business interests. But let's be clear, the US didn't invent this. This is something that powerful countries and empires have always done.
We don't look at that positively, though. That's the difference, because like we understand that like imperialism was like objectively bad. You know, colonialism was objectively bad. I think everybody understands that. Okay.
These US-led coups, especially during the Cold War, was how the overthrow of these governments often stamped out new democracies, budding democratic movements, replacing them with authoritarian leaders who would go on to oppress the people with the support and backing of the United States. And in the process, redirecting the country's history. Lately, Russia has been meddling in the election process of the United States. And I've been reflecting.
What? No! No! He did not! No! Bro, It's so weird that at no point did Johnny Harris say like, the United States did Facebook ads in fucking Chile. Like that was, it almost feels like, arming and funding rebel groups, reactionary, fascist, violent, genocidal rebel groups who then execute the leader of the state that was like democratically elected versus like Facebook ads that they bought using American companies to run misinformation campaigns. Like, hold on.
Reflecting on my feelings towards that, the violation of having an external power, sowing doubt and polarization and fear in my own democracy, in my own society. It feels like
Russia set up Radio Free Florida. Did America not do this in Russia with Gorbachev? America did this with everyone and still continues to do it. If you see a Radio Free, that is like Voice of America, Radio Free Ukraine, Radio Free whatever the fuck. Like that's literally not even secret. Like it's just like openly, it's just basically openly fucking funded CIA propaganda. That extent, that's literally, that's it. That is like what Russia did. Okay? That. And it's never just misinformation. Understand? It's never just like, America's biggest fault and failure isn't doing, counter-revolutionary propaganda in these countries. It's the other stuff that they did after. It's like farming and funding and arming the fucking the guys that are like out of their minds. That's the way you do a coup, not by just like misinforming the public. You know what I mean? Also, this is such funny. This is like one of those, like every time like an ML on Twitter will be like, look at all the American bases out around China. And then like one of those is like literally not even a base, or it's like a Chinese island or something. And then Sock Them Twitter will like rip that apart. They'll be like, these guys are so fucking stupid. There aren't 300 bases around China. There's 298. You don't know anything about global politics. You know what I mean? Like, Johnny Harris is doing the reverse of that by making it seem like Russia has these like, islands of power around America, I think. But you know exactly what I'm talking about. Globe Twitter loves being like, you fucking idiot. You don't know anything. Imagine showing this graphic that shows that there's like 400 military bases that have weapons directed at Russia when there's only 354? You're so stupid. I wish Johnny Harris talked about the Chinese balloon. Anyway, Ontario, the greatest hub of Russian power.
Such a violation. And it is. This is giving me just a tiny taste of what it feels like to have an outside power pulling.
What? First of all, it's not even new. The USSR used to do this shit too. What the fuck? There's a reason why MLK and every other black liberation movement was not just put down because they were like fucking, black people trying to gain civil liberties, but also because they were communists, right? Like, yeah, the USSR did agitative propaganda. That is what it's called. It's called agitprop, okay? Yeah, of course they did that. What the fuck? That's a permanent fixture of society. That's like what warring nations or what, countries do. It doesn't even have to have like some ideological underpinning. Russia now absolutely does that for both sides. Literally, like RT is a perfect example. If you look at Russia today, they'll have programming that at like 5 p.m. is like America KKK is an imperialist warring nation, and we must abolish white supremacy in the United States as it is a global superpower funding white supremacy. And then at 5:30 they're like the homosexuals in America are degenerate perverts and must be eradicated at all costs. It's like They do that. They don't give a shit. They literally have no genuine ideological reason. They just want to like cause chaos. Okay? And that's nothing. America does that too with ideological reasoning, which is pro-capitalist for the most part. I'm literally the Twitter ML in the scenario you described. Anyway.
Pulling the strings in your country, tearing it apart for their own purposes, and in the process creating more problems for the people and for the United States itself, undermining any semblance of democracy or development, all in the name of keeping the US on top and dominant over the globe.
This is hilarious, and here's what the actual graph should look like, scaled properly just on one axis. An analysis looks at how defense spending among the nations with the highest expenditures has changed since 1992 and what may have driven those changes. Wow, China sure seems to be spending a lot of money. Oh, never mind. Yeah. This is why I never trusted Chris Hedges. No, I think Chris Hedges is a good person. I think. Dude, you can't shit on a guy who fucking spends most of his free time educating prisoners, okay? Like, there are plenty of... guys, you're forgetting. Like, there are people who are... there are people who are otherwise good or you know, decent human beings who have good opinions and good ideas that like also fucking are being funded by the Russian propaganda arm. Okay. Yes. And I say this as someone who like Chris Hedges is like, you know, made fun of me and Bernie Sanders. Okay. Yeah. He has shat on Bernie and you. I know. I don't give a fuck. We have a difference in opinion. But I still don't think that he's like, I still don't think that, I don't know, he's like a bad person. Here's a quick follow-up for the clip.
Interesting one.
Socialist leader of Grenada, Maurice Bishop, explains why the U.S. empire considered their revolution to be even more dangerous.
That we saw very recently in a secret report of the State Department. I want to tell you about that one. That secret report made this point, that Grenada is different to Cuba and Nicaragua. And the Grenada Revolution is in one sense even worse, I'm using their language, than the Cuban and Nicaraguan revolutions, because the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada speaks English and therefore can communicate directly to the people of the United States.
In a similar vein, the Haitian Revolution was always considered a particularly egregious one because not through dialogue and language, but it was black people. You know what I mean? And God forbid black people in America recognize that, you know, similar things could happen. Yeah, an actual slave rebellion, a slave revolution. You know what? I'm going to do something I rarely ever do here. I'm going to give a shout out to the Polish. Okay? Good job. I didn't know about the Polish involvement. And, you know, you guys did great. Okay? There you go. Courtois. The Polish did a great job in Haiti. Okay? There you go.
I can see from your applause, sisters and brothers,
yeah, extremely, insanely rare Polish W,
that you agree with the report. But I want to tell you what that same report also said, and said that also made us very dangerous. And that is that the people of Grenada and the leadership of Grenada are predominantly black.
You watch. Oh man, maybe it is breaking the fucking Twitter videos of old clips.
There's an interesting black, and they had a correct statistic. They said that 95% of our population is black, and they had a correct statistic. And if we have 95% of predominantly African origin in our country, then we can have a dangerous appeal to 30 million black people in the United States.
Yeah. U.S. government surveils us more than fascist governments. The fact that Grenada was an afterthought in that conversation shows you, though, the genuine fear that the American government and the State Department had towards any country, no matter how small, no matter how large, that all matter of revolutionary activity had to be squashed by force. It was because of the threat posed by Maurice Bishop and the socialist government in Grenada to the U.S. empire, both abroad and at home, that he was assassinated, after which the U.S. invaded the country.
Grenada and the leadership of Grenada speaks English and therefore can communicate directly to the people of the United States.
Which, by the way, for the record, understand that, people always say, Hasan, you support authoritarian governments. You're a bad guy. You support, you're a tanky. You support authoritarian governments. Understand that the reason why I place Cuba in a completely different place in my heart and also in general is for this reason. All of these other countries have fallen, okay, under the might of the U.S. empire. And to be fair, it's almost an inevitability. You know what I mean? So for the fact that Cuba to continue, despite this egregious human rights violation, this ongoing human rights violation in the form of this embargo, the fact that it still survives under, when all facts point to the exact opposite, that's a pretty impressive feat. I have to recognize that. Also, the reason why Cuba was not mentioned in the Johnny Harris video is because of that reason, ironically. That was the greatest W for Cuba, is not being mentioned in the Johnny Harris video about American coup d'etats because it wasn't successful. And trust me, they fucking tried, okay? Same with Venezuela even. Oh my God. Fucking A, dude. Twitter video is so broken. Okay, I can't do this. Dr. Dre, thank you for the 5. Get the subs, by the way. This clip of Castro goes around on Reddit, and whenever it's posted, people go straight to bad-mouthing Castro personally. One of my favorites is saying Fidel Castro is a homophobe. One really interesting thing that I was thinking about, or was reading about a little bit recently, is homophobia in general, because I'm brushing up on my faux activities, right? So as far as Fidel Castro goes, it's pretty funny when people say he's homophobic, when he was literally ahead of the game in recognizing his wrongs as far as like directly homophobia, but also like, oh yeah, or Che Guevara was a racist. That one's a really good one too. That's actually a really funny one. Because like, again, something that we always talk about, God, one of the things I always talk about is growth and learning from your past, your past experiences, and like becoming a better person, and you know, offering more than enough in the forms of restitution, right? Like, Che Guevara said some racist shit about black people back in the fucking day. Okay? He did. But the idea that a guy who gave his body to the liberation of African nations, you know, dying a racist man, is pretty funny when you literally are like a white supremacist. You know what I mean? Like, as the most basic American position is like still centered around white supremacy. So that's always funny. But the other thing I was going to talk about is like, as far as anti-queer sentiment goes, right? I did not know enough about this, but Thailand has a long-standing history of queer culture and queer experiences. And I don't want to say anything wrong about this. I don't want to like fuck this up. But one of the Until the Risen King. Yeah, no, it's not Orientalism. No. It's the exact opposite of what I was going to say. One of the possible reasons as to why Thailand has or had a long-standing history of like queer culture is its lack of Western occupation, like direct occupation. And a lot of other countries that experienced any form of colonization, and this is something I've talked about with respect to the Middle East, with respect to like Islam. Remember when I said like Islam, there's a lot of gay shit going on in the Middle East. There was a lot of gay shit going on in Muslim nations. And then like an understanding of homophobia and resentment was developed through time, through Western involvement. And that's one of the interesting things that I've found out about at least Thailand, is that its lack of like Western occupation could have been one of the reasons as to why it, like the fact that it never got like conquered, could have been one of the reasons as to why there wasn't as like as what homophobia was not, or our understanding of like gender, our understanding of sexuality was not, you know, forcibly indoctrinated to the people of Thailand. Pre-colonialism in the Philippines was pretty gay too. Now it's extremely conservative. Yeah. The coolest thing about Thailand, in my opinion, is that its predecessor kingdom, Siam, wanted to send war elephants to Lincoln and the Union Army to fight against their for their fight against slavery. Yeah. Lack of Western occupations. There's a ton of white dudes there being complete jackasses right now. I'm not talking about sex tourism, dog. Okay, chill. That's not what I'm referencing. Anyway, so that's a interesting thing, especially because remember what I said about liberals using their own seasoning and their own flavor to justify like dominant hierarchies, but in a liberal way. When I talked about anti-blackness, but from a liberal side versus a overtly racist conservative anti-blackness. I think pink washing basically is the rainbow washing is basically the dominant prevailing narrative of justifying colonial occupation or justifying Western imperialism nowadays amongst liberals at the very least. And you see it so fucking frequently. Sometimes you sound like CIA is bad, therefore it's okay for dictators to violate human rights, and people in their countries who protest and speak against dictators are CIA puppets. I know you know better. Once again, I listened to you talking about Turkey and Erdogan, but I think you're not making it clear enough that those violations are unacceptable. No, of course those violations are unacceptable. But if you've listened to me talk about Turkey and Erdogan, you understand that like every Turk in this chat would tell you that Turkey would be in a worse place overall if Fethullah Gülen was in power, if another American coup, which was a failed one, which Johnny Harris did not mention, was the one in Turkey not that long ago. And that is certainly what guides my opinion. Look at this account when you created it, dude. I mean, yeah, but like this person clearly has been in here and is this sock account, okay? Fethullah wasn't a coup, though. He worked all the way with Erdogan until like the last 8 years. I know, but at its time, it was going to be an American coup. And also, Fethullah Gülen is a CIA operative way before, even while he was like training alongside Erdogan. All right. I'm going to pee while this plays. I'll be back in a second.
Ha resuelto el capitalismo. No ha resuelto ningún problema. Ha saqueado el mundo. Ha dejado toda esta pobreza. Ha creado estilos de vida y modelos de consumo que son incompatibles con las realidades. Han envenenado las aguas, los mares. Quiero decir, los ríos, los lagos, los mares, la atmósfera, la tierra. Han creado el despilfarro más increíble. Y yo siempre cito un ejemplo. Imagínate que cada chino tuviera un automóvil o quisiera tener un automóvil. Cada uno de los 1.100 millones de chinos. O que cada uno de los indios, que son alrededor de 800 millones, quisiera tener un automóvil y este método, este estilo de vida. Y que África hiciera lo mismo. Y que casi 450 millones de latinoamericanos hicieran lo mismo. ¿Cuánto duraría el petróleo? ¿Cuánto duraría el gas? ¿Cuánto durarían los recursos naturales? ¿Qué quedaría de la capa de ozono? ¿Qué quedaría del oxígeno sobre la Tierra? ¿Qué pasaría con el dióxido de carbono? Y todos estos fenómenos que están cambiando la ecología del mundo, están cambiando la Tierra, están haciendo cada vez más difícil la vida en nuestro planeta. ¿Es que el capitalismo acaso le ha dado al mundo un modelo de vida, un modelo de sociedad? No debiéramos pensar en cosas más racionales, como sería la educación de toda la población, la alimentación, la salud, una vivienda decorosa, una cultura elevada. ¿Acaso el capitalismo nos ha, con sus leyes ciegas, su egoísmo como principio, nos ha dado a nosotros un modelo, nos ha enseñado un camino? ¿O el camino de la humanidad va a ser el camino trazado por el capitalismo hasta ahora? Se puede hablar de crisis del socialismo, pero hay una crisis mayor del capitalismo que no tiene salida.
The USSR was some of the worst polluters. Yeah, I know. That's what happens when you industrialize, and that's what happens when you take 400 years of industrialization and put it into literally fucking one lifespan of a nation state. A short one too. That's so crazy. People are like, oh, look at China. Look at USSR. Like, yeah, I know, dude. It's crazy. These guys are so awful. They're like enslaving their people. Oh, man. That's real cool that you said that. As opposed to enslaving random people that you robbed from their homes in Africa. Additionally hilarious when you are literally an American and your fucking fridge is like, your fridge's electric consumption is insane. Like right now. I'm gonna call you out with most Americans. You guys use AC too much, man. Yeah, exactly. We're eviscerating the planet, baby. And I'm on board. I never said I'm pro nature. Okay? Make no mistake. I love AC, dude. Aircon. We aren't streamers like you. We don't have fridges. Yeah, I know. One of my favorite types of chatters is the chatter who's like, look at big money bags over here talking about having a fridge. This guy. Okay. Some of us don't know what that's like, all right? I was like, damn, I didn't realize, bro. Fucking shit was bad over there for you, I guess. Big money bags with this fucking fridge. Stop flexing. Stop flexing your fridge, dude. Okay, we're going to get the fun.